They say money can buy almost anything, but what happens when money collides with humanity, dignity, and secrets buried deeper than anyone dares to admit? That's what makes this story unlike any you've ever heard before. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second of it. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful, emotional, and thought-provoking stories that reveal the side of life nobody talks about. Now, imagine an extravagant, chandelier-lit auction hall in Dubai, a place where wealth doesn't just whisper. It screams through polished marble floors, glittering gowns, and watches that cost more than most people's houses. The world's richest men, men who could bend governments with a phone call, had gathered for what the press whispered was a special evening. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but speculation had run wild. Rare jewels, ancient art, maybe even historic manuscripts would be sold to the highest bidder. But in the corner of the stage, behind a crimson curtain, stood something. No, someone that would silence the whispers and send shockwaves across continents. She was a single mother named Layla, her face half hidden by a veil, trembling not from the cold air of the hall, but from the sheer humiliation of being paraded like property. She hadn't signed up for this. Desperation had dragged her here. She'd been told that this auction wasn't like the others, that it was symbolic, a transaction staged by shadowy elites who love spectacle. But when the curtain dropped and the auctioneer's voice boomed through the microphone, declaring her as the evening's prize, every doubt in her heart exploded into terror. And then, the man who stunned the world rose from his seat. His name was Sheikh Karim al-Zahir, a billionaire known for ruthlessness in business, but also rumored to be a widower haunted by an empty palace echoing with silence. He raised his hand casually, as though purchasing a painting, and with a number no one dared challenge, he bought Layla before the gavel slammed down. Gasps filled the hall. Phones buzzed with secret recordings. By dawn, headlines screamed across the globe. Arab billionaire buys woman at auction. Outrage poured in from human rights activists, politicians, and celebrities who couldn't believe such a thing could happen in the 21st century. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that beneath the scandalous surface lay a truth so shocking that when it came out, it would redefine both Kareem's life and Layla's destiny. Because Kareem hadn't come there to own her. He had come to fulfill a promise, one linked to a tragedy, a child he could never have, and a twist that would shatter the line between power and vulnerability. The night after the auction was a storm of noise around the world, but inside Kareem al-Zahir's private convoy, as it cut through the neon-lit streets of Dubai, silence pressed heavily between him and the veiled woman seated across from him. Cameras had already caught their departure. Helicopters hovered above, and by the time they reached the gates of his desert estate, the scandal had become global breaking news. Layla clutched her hands tightly in her lap, every nerve screaming at her to escape. But where could she go? She wasn't a guest, not yet a prisoner, but she was undeniably the center of a storm she had never asked for. Kareem sat back in his leather seat, his jaw clenched, his mind not on the headlines, but on the ghost of his late wife, Amal, whose last words to him before her tragic accident had been about children they never had. For years he had carried that grief like a chain, and when he learned of Layla's existence through underground whispers, that she was not only desperate but tied by blood to something he had lost, he knew he had to act. The auction wasn't real, not in the sense people thought. It had been orchestrated, staged by his rivals to humiliate him, but he had turned the spectacle into a rescue disguised as scandal. Layla didn't know this, of course. To her, he was the monster who had bought her, the man who now owned her dignity. When the convoy stopped and she stepped into the vast palace, her breath caught at the golden arches and sweeping courtyards that looked like something out of a dream. But inside she felt only dread. Kareem finally broke the silence, his deep voice steady but carrying a strange heaviness. "You're safe here. No one will touch you again." Layla snapped her head toward him, anger burning through her fear. "Safe? You just bought me like cattle," she spat, her voice shaking. His eyes darkened with something between pain and regret. "You don't understand," he said softly. "This wasn't about ownership. It was about protection. and about a truth you deserve to know. She didn't trust him, not yet, but the way his gaze dropped, as if haunted by invisible chains, stirred questions in her she didn't want to ask. The palace staff whispered as they passed, stunned by the sight of a veiled single mother entering the home of a billionaire widower. Rumors spread like wildfire among servants and guards. Some said she was a mistress. Others whispered she was carrying his child already. But only Kareem knew the truth. Layla wasn't just any woman. She was the sister of Amal, the only living blood tie to the wife he had loved more than life itself. And the child Layla was raising in secret carried a truth that could either heal Kareem's broken soul or destroy them both when the world found out. When the cameras cut away and the whispers in the crowd grew louder, Samira stood frozen, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might leap out her chest, while Rashid, the billionaire Arab who had just effectively bought her, extended a hand in a way that looked almost ceremonial rather than possessive. People around them still thought this was some kind of outrageous display of power, an eccentric oil tycoon flexing wealth in a bizarre auction. But as Rashid looked at her, there was no arrogance, no mockery. There was something deeper, an intensity in his eyes that suggested he was searching for answers far beyond the shallow assumptions being made by the crowd. "You don't know me," he said softly, so only she could hear, "but I know enough about pain, about being treated like you're invisible, to know you don't deserve this spectacle." His words, strangely gentle for someone of his stature, sent chills through Samira, who had lived years of being dismissed, abandoned, and overlooked as a single mother scraping together pennies to feed her child. Her past flashed like a film reel, late nights cleaning, people sneering at her as if she were disposable, and the countless times she had to swallow humiliation just so her daughter could have shoes for school. And now here was this man, whose name was whispered in financial papers across continents, suddenly pulling her out of obscurity and into a storm she never asked for. She wanted to pull away, to scream at him for daring to make a spectacle of her life. But her body betrayed her, with trembling hands that almost instinctively reached for his, because somewhere in his voice, in the way he said, "You don't deserve this," was something she hadn't felt in years: validation. The crowd's murmurs shifted into judgmental chuckles, with many assuming Rashid was indulging in some twisted fantasy of buying a woman. But beneath the chaos, his next words stunned Samira even more. "This isn't about owning you. It's about freeing you. And maybe, just maybe, it's about finding something I've been missing too." She could barely process it, yet his tone carried none of the rehearsed lines rich men usually use to impress. It carried a rawness that unsettled her, as if he himself was on the edge of unraveling. That moment was only the beginning of a long, tumultuous journey that would test her resilience, his secrets, and the very definition of what it meant to be saved. Because what Samira didn't know yet was that Rashid had not simply stepped in her life to change hers. He was about to uncover a truth about his own existence, so shocking, so painfully intertwined with hers, that both of them would question whether destiny had orchestrated this auction far more than any human hand ever could. The night after the auction was a blur of flashing cameras, heated commentary, and online storms of people debating whether what had happened was a scandal or a love story in disguise. Samira sat in a luxury hotel room, a place far removed from the cramped apartment she once shared with her daughter, staring at the city lights outside with a hollow feeling that refused to fade. Rashid had arranged the stay, insisting she needed protection from the sudden flood of media attention, but she couldn't shake the sense that she was now trapped in another kind of cage, this one gilded with gold. She replayed every word he had spoken, every flicker in his eyes, wondering if he had truly meant it when he said he wasn't buying her, but freeing her. She wasn't naive. She knew powerful men often cloak their desires in grand speeches, and she had seen enough broken promises to distrust the softest words. Yet something about him gnawed at her thoughts, not because of his wealth or status, but because of the shadows she thought she glimpsed behind his confidence, as if he too was wrestling with chains invisible to the world. When Rashid finally appeared later that evening, dressed not in the extravagant garb expected of billionaires, but in a simple white shirt with sleeves rolled up. He looked less like the untouchable tycoon the world knew and more like a man stripped bare of his armor. He didn't enter with entitlement. He paused at the doorway, as though uncertain if he had the right to step further into her space. "I know what you must think of me," he began quietly, "but this isn't about spectacle. It's about survival. Yours and maybe mine." Samira's chest tightened as anger and curiosity collided inside her. "Survival," she echoed, her voice trembling between defiance and exhaustion. "Do you have any idea what survival really looks like for someone like me? Cleaning houses until my back gives out, begging landlords for a few more days, hiding my tears so my daughter doesn't think her mother is broken." Her words hit the air sharp and bitter, but Rashid didn't flinch. Instead, he walked closer, his gaze heavy with something unspoken. "Do you think money protects you from suffering?" he said at last, his tone sharper now. "I was raised in palaces, but I was not free. Every decision, every relationship, every breath I took was a transaction, a negotiation, a debt owed to someone else's ambition. When I saw you standing there, discarded and humiliated by people who should have cherished you, I saw myself. Not in poverty, but in bondage. You and I are not so different, Samira. They chained you with judgment. They chained me with wealth. And I couldn't walk away without breaking at least one chain tonight." Samira's anger faltered as she searched his face for deceit, but what she saw instead was a raw honesty that unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. Still, her instincts screamed caution. She needed to protect her daughter, to ensure that whatever this was wouldn't end in more pain. "And what about my child?" she whispered finally, her voice cracking. "She's my world. If this is just some twisted fantasy of yours, she will be the one to suffer when it all falls apart." For the first time, Rashid's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists at his sides before he slowly exhaled. "I would never hurt a child," he said hoarsely, his voice betraying a fracture beneath. "In fact, I need you to understand something about why I did this. It wasn't just to rescue you. It was because," he broke off, eyes flickering with pain, as though forcing himself to stop before revealing too much. The silence between them stretched, heavy with questions neither dared to voice, until Rashid finally stepped back, his mask of calm returning, but not fully sealing the cracks. "For now," he said quietly, "all you need to know is that you are safe. Tomorrow, I will explain everything. But I promise you, Samira, what happened last night was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of ours. And when the truth comes out, you will understand why destiny put us in that room together." His words lingered long after he left, echoing in Samira's heart like an unshakable warning and a fragile hope entwined into one. And though she tried to convince herself she didn't care, she knew deep down that the secret he was holding on to could either shatter her world completely or rebuild it into something she had never dared to dream. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the hotel suite in golden streams, illuminating the heavy silence that lingered after a restless night. Samira had hardly slept. Her mind kept circling Rashid's unfinished words, the fracture in his voice when he almost confessed something deeper, something that felt like the core of why he had pulled her out of that humiliating auction. She had rehearsed 100 possible scenarios in her head, from discovering he was just playing some elaborate game to realizing he might carry wounds of his own that were too raw to show the world. But nothing could prepare her for the truth he finally shared when he returned, looking more worn than a man of his wealth and power should ever appear. He sat opposite her, no arrogance in his posture, only a quiet gravity that pressed the air between them. "Samira," he began slowly, "I told you I would explain, and you deserve nothing less than the truth. But you must promise me one thing, that you'll listen with your heart, not just your fears." His tone was almost pleading, a strange vulnerability for someone whose name could shake markets. She nodded warily, her hands clutching the thin fabric of her dress, bracing for whatever revelation he was about to unfold. "I cannot have children," Rashid said at last, the words cutting through the room like a blade made of sorrow. The doctors told me years ago, an accident, a punishment of fate, maybe. In my world, where bloodlines and heirs mean everything, that truth has been my curse. Every woman I courted, every family arrangement collapsed when they discovered what I could not give them. I became a king without a kingdom, a man surrounded by riches but denied the legacy my family demanded of me. He paused, swallowing hard, his voice trembling just slightly. When I saw you, Samira, when I saw the fire in your eyes, the way you clung to dignity, even as they treated you like nothing, I thought, here is a woman who knows what it means to fight for life itself. And then, when I learned you already had a daughter, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I saw a chance not just to give someone else life, but to finally live myself. Not by fathering a child, but by protecting one, by standing beside you. Samira's breath caught as his words sank in, a mixture of shock, compassion, and suspicion twisting inside her. She had expected secrets of greed or desire, not a confession of pain so deeply human that it mirrored her own struggles in another form. So, she whispered slowly, "You bought me because I had something you couldn't have? A child." The sharp edge in her tone betrayed the wound of being reduced yet again, of being seen as a means to an end. Rashid shook his head violently, leaning forward, his eyes burning with urgency. "No, not like that. Not as property, not as possession. I didn't buy you. I freed you from a world that would have destroyed you because I saw in you and your daughter the family I was never allowed to build. Samira, I didn't want a transaction. I wanted redemption. And maybe, in some selfish way, I thought saving you could save me too." The room pulsed with silence as Samira searched his face, torn between the instinct to guard her heart and the undeniable truth in his eyes. She remembered every cold night she had wrapped her daughter in her arms, every insult she had endured just to keep food on the table. And she realized that in all those moments of despair, she had prayed not for wealth but for a chance, just a chance, to build a life of safety and dignity. Rashid's words didn't erase her scars, but they offered something she had never been offered before: partnership, not pity. Still, the chains of mistrust were not so easily broken. "If what you say is true," she said finally, her voice trembling but resolute, "then prove it. Prove that you see me as more than some symbol of redemption. Prove that you see me as a woman, as a mother, as a human being who deserves respect, not as someone you rescued, but as someone you stand beside." Rashid's answer was not in words, but in action. Over the weeks that followed, he did not shower her with jewels or lock her in palaces. Instead, he visited her daughter's school anonymously, ensuring she had the best teachers and safe surroundings without flaunting his wealth. He sat with Samira in quiet cafes rather than ballrooms, listening to her stories of hardship with the patience of a man who knew silence could heal more than riches. He shielded her from the media frenzy that still tried to twist their story into scandal, never once demanding gratitude or obedience. Slowly, painfully, Samira began to see that beneath the billionaire mask was a man who understood loneliness, who craved family not as a legacy, but as a lifeline. Months later, when Rashid finally stood before Samira's daughter and asked her permission to be part of their lives, not as a master, not as a savior, but as someone willing to earn trust step by fragile step, the little girl looked at her mother, then at Rashid, and simply said, "Only if you promise to never make Mama cry again." The promise came not with hesitation, but with a depth that cracked his voice as he swore it. And in that moment, Samira realized the twist was not that a billionaire had bought her life. It was that in the most unexpected way, he had bought his own freedom by learning to give without taking, to love without owning. The world would never understand their story the way they lived it. To outsiders, it would always be a scandalous headline, a shocking spectacle. But to Samira and Rashid, it became something else entirely. A testimony that fate sometimes works through the cruelest paths to bring two broken souls together, not to complete each other, but to remind them that even in a world obsessed with power and appearances, love and dignity remain the greatest wealth of all. And for those who once mocked her, who once treated her as nothing more than a desperate single mother to be discarded in auction, Samira's silence became her victory because she no longer needed their approval. She had built a life no one could strip from her, a life where her daughter would grow knowing that strength is not in what you own, but in what you overcome. And to you watching this story unfold, remember, life has a way of placing us in rooms we never expected, facing choices we never wanted. Sometimes, the very moments meant to break us become the turning points that rebuild us. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales of resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that defies the world's expectations. Because somewhere out there, perhaps even in your own life, the twist that changes everything is waiting for you too.